What if the true story behind World War I has been hiding in plain sight? We're taught it began with an assassination in Sarajevo, but that's like blaming an iceberg for sinking the Titanic. It's only the visible trigger. What if the real cause was a deep, systemic rot? Consider this. Europe's empires were already financially bankrupt decades before the first shot was fired. What if the assassination was merely the perfect excuse to solve a financial crisis that threatened to dismantle their power? Let's trace how crushing debt transformed political rivalries into financial do-or-die missions, revealing how history's greatest military conflict was, in essence, the world's most devastating debt restructuring scheme. The story starts not in 1914, but in the 1850s. European powers discovered they could borrow to build empires faster than they could conquer to pay for them. Britain pioneered this, using massive loans to lace India with railways. 6 continents with naval bases and fund history's largest military. It worked as long as the empire kept growing, creating new revenue to service the debt. By 1914, Britain's national debt had ballooned to an astronomical £650 million. France, Germany, and Russia followed the same playbook, each borrowing heavily to fuel their imperial ambitions. They thought they were playing a game of global chess. In reality, they were trapped in a game of compound interest. Imagine your neighbors are all buying bigger houses with massive mortgages. To keep up, you feel forced to do the same, betting that rising property values will cover your payments. That was Europe, except the houses were battleships, armies, and colonies. Germany's attempt to challenge British naval supremacy while building railroads in Africa and colonies in the Pacific created an imperial debt spiral. It was a logic eerily similar to the 2008 housing bubble. The belief that ever-rising asset value new territories would always cover ever-rising debt. The Ottoman Empire offered a terrifying preview. By 1875, it was bankrupt, with debt payments consuming over half its national revenue. European creditors didn't just write off the loss. It created the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, giving foreign bondholders direct control over Turkish taxes and spending. A sovereign empire became effectively a subsidiary of European banks. This was the blueprint. Modern financial colonialism. By 1914, every major European power was in the same trap. They owed massive debts that required constant expansion to service, but expansion required even more borrowing. The system was mathematically doomed. War presented a twisted solution. Victory promised enemy resources and territories to solve the revenue crisis, while wartime necessity justified borrowing levels unthinkable in peacetime. Here's where the plot thickens. By 1916, Britain wasn't just funding its own war, it was bankrolling most of the empire, all of Italy's war, and 2/3 of French and Russian military spending. How? Through a web of international finance that made the war look less like a political clash and more like a colossal debt collection operation, with armies as the repo men. Why was J.P. Morgan Jr., an American banker, organizing Allied military supply contracts 2 years before America entered the war? In 1915, Morgan syndicated a $500 million loan to the Allies. The catch: every British munitions purchase had to go through Morgan firms. The empire where the sun never set had outsourced its war finance to Wall Street. As European governments borrowed more, interest rates soared, making territorial conquest not just desirable but a mathematical necessity to service existing debts. London's great merchant banks, Rothschilds, Barings, Morgans, weren't neutral observers. They were active players with enormous stakes in specific military outcomes. Their bond portfolios depended on Allied victory. This created a system where military defeat meant more than lost territory. It meant economic collapse, default, and loss of sovereignty, the Ottoman fate. This financial logic explains the war's horrifying escalation and total nature. Partial victory wasn't enough. Only complete conquest could generate the plunder and reparations needed to pay back the international creditors. The banking system had created incentives that made peace more dangerous than war for indebted governments. America's entry into the war is the final revealing act. The standard story cites German submarines. The financial reality is about exposure. By 1917, J.P. Morgan and the U.S. Treasury had loaned the Allies the modern equivalent of hundreds of billions of dollars. An Allied defeat would have triggered an American financial catastrophe. U.S. soldiers weren't just shipping off to Europe for democracy. They were sailing to protect the giant loans American banks had made. The armistice in 1918 didn't bring peace. It triggered the largest debt restructuring in history. The Treaty of Versailles was, at its core, a debt collection mechanism. Germany was slapped with massive reparations, which it paid with loans from American banks. Britain and France then used that German money to pay their own war debts to the United States. It was a circular flow of debt, with American banks at the center. The human cost of this system is almost incomprehensible. Germany made its final World War I reparations payment on October 3, 2010. Britain paid off its WWI debt to the U.S. in 2006. People born decades after the war spent their lives paying for it. World War I didn't end war. It established the modern template where international conflict serves as a pretext for emergency borrowing, creating permanent, multi-generational debt obligations that transfer wealth and policy control to financial institutions. The bankers won in 1918, and in many ways, we're all still living in the financially dominated world they created. Think you know who profits from war? Subscribe. I'll reveal what they don't want you to see.